Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And today we have a very, very special interview here for you all. Now, my guest today is a first timer here on the show, but if you look at her last name, you may remember a previous guest that I had not too long ago. Now, my guest completed her PhD and MA degrees in art history from the University of Haifa in Israel and has a BA in classics from Temple University in Philadelphia. And if you've been following her on Instagram, you will know that she has published her first book, which is The Crown of Thorns, Humble Gods and Humiliated Kings. Now, the Crown of Thorns has become one of the most ubiquitous features in Christian religious art, but was a crown of history anything like the crown of popular medieval art or piety? And the image that springs to mind is that of a bloodied, beaten Jesus wearing a cruelly fashioned woven crown made of sharp thorns. But this image is deeply misleading based on a fundamental misunderstanding and mistranslation of the gospel. And my guest rectifies this misunderstanding, showing how the crown of thorns underwent a yet unrecognized artistic evolution. And she tracks the artistic progress of the crown of thorns from when it was first depicted in the 4th century up until the 11th century, as well as even modern depictions in art and cinema. And with all of that, she demonstrates how a simple mistranslation led to a different understanding of the Gospels and unexpected trajectory of European art with profound and unintended consequences. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our final guest for the month of March, Dr. Faith Tibble. Dr. Tibble, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And as I said, viewers and listeners, if her last name sounds familiar, that's because I had her husband on the show not too long ago talking about his book. And this is the first time on the show, as I've never had a couple on the show before in separate interviews. But this is a huge milestone. And honestly, I'm so excited that we have you here on the show, Dr. Tibble.
Great. It's very exciting to be here. Yes, I remember your show with Steve Tibble, my husband, and it was excellent. So I'm looking forward to talking to you as well.
Awesome, awesome. So before we dive into Crown of Thorns, let's talk a little bit more about you, Faith. So, based on your bio, you completed your master's in history as well as art history, which is incredible, awesome. So, walk us through that, that process of, how did this love of history come about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a fun journey because I obviously got my degree in Philadelphia in the classics, and then I actually ended up going on a dig in Israel. And from there, I just sort of thought, I can't stop. I've got to keep going. Got to keep studying history. And so I decided to go for the MA and the PhD. And previously, I had taught Latin briefly to middle schoolers, which is they're always fun. And I thought it was time to go ahead and dive into history more deeply by getting the PhD. And it was an incredible journey. I think that what I probably particularly enjoyed about diving in like that was that you got to just see every facet of a particular topic. And you got to be surprised every day by new discoveries, by things that you weren't expecting. And it's just it's an incredible way to learn. So I think that's basically why I kept going and what made it so interesting and why I keep doing it. You don't want to leave these loves behind, and so we keep going and keep discovering.
Absolutely. And now turning over to your debut book, which is fascinating. I know I kind of gave a little teaser of the book itself, but is there anything else you would like to share as a little teaser into the Crown of Thorns, which I also like the sub title of as well, Humble Gods and Humiliated Kings. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? A little teaser, a little window into this book of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. The Crown of Thorns, this originally started back when I was at university. And I had been in a Roman history class. And in this class, we were talking about military decorations, right? So kind
Mm,
of like medals that we would get today. And they usually are given wreaths. You know, you can get wreaths in the Roman army for all sorts of things, you know, for being
right.
brave, for leading a charge, for all sorts of things. And then it sort of hit me that the soldiers who were giving the crown of thorns to Jesus were first and foremost Roman soldiers. So were they really giving him a crown of a king? Or was this probably much closer to a general? And that's what sort of started all of this. And eventually when I got to the PhD, I realized that this image of the crown of thorns was just as fascinating as sort of the background of the making of the crown of thorns in first century
Mm,
Judea, because we see the crown of thorns once in the mid 4th century on a sarcophagus, right? And then it disappears for 700 years. We
right.
just don't see it. It's not depicted. And when it eventually does come up, it's almost appears to be without artistic precedent. And so the book really looks at not just the journey of the crown of thorns to when it becomes something that you and I would recognize,
Hmm.
uh, but also why it looks the way it does when it finally does appear in medieval art,
Right.
because it has a lot to do with politics. It has a lot to do with kingship, with medieval kingship. And it has a lot to do with sort of theological precedents. So, what you're getting in this book is not just art history. You are getting a lot of art history, but you're also getting you're getting medieval politics, you're getting Roman history, you're getting if you like the Ottonians or sort of early German history, the Carolingians, and even a
Mm,
bit of modern art. So it's looking at all of these different facets of the Crown of Thorns and how it came into being, which wasn't just through art. Because when you think of these times and places like the medieval world, you have to consider that a lot of these artists were taking their influence from their time and place, right?
right.
So the book really looks at what is happening to the art within its time and place. So what is influencing these artists, and who is their audience? And that's really what the book is trying to achieve. And so there's something in there for almost everyone. So it's a hopefully a fun read.
Awesome. And that actually reminded me of another book, very similar, from fellow historian Luke Daly, whose book is on, well, one of his many books, Medieval Saints and Sinners. And from that one, which I want to say was a year ago, we talked about how when we look at the iconography of saints and how they are depicted, first in the late Western Roman Empire age to then, of course, the Eastern Roman Empire age, and then in medieval Europe under the Carolingians and the formation of the Holy Roman Empire, and seeing like how are saints depicted and like familiar saints, like how have they changed over time? How are they depicted? Like some of them are viewed more modestly, some of them are depicted very regal in their features as well as their placement in medieval art and of course, in the religious churches throughout medieval world, as well as the Greek Orthodox churches. It's very, very fascinating how it's almost very similar to your book, Dr. Tibble, how, this symbol, this image that we have has taken on different meanings over time. And it has led to a lot of, mistranslations or misunderstandings throughout human history. So let's talk about that decision. So what would you consider, Dave, to be the aha moment for you that you wanted to take what you've researched, what you've learned, and develop it into a book?
Um, I think it probably was when I realized the distance between the Crown of Thorns being depicted in sort of the early Christian era to when it was depicted again 700 years later. That for
Mm,
me really stuck out because it just seemed so unusual and so strange that there would in I mean, you know, we can walk through the halls of any museum in Europe and the US and Canada, and you'll find, you know, painting after painting after painting of passion iconography. And this passion iconography has been developed for a long time, but for some reason, this sort of ubiquitous image of the crown of thorns came so late. And so I really wanted to understand why that was. And I think that this book can help a lot of people also understand that,
mm,
because what it does for people, it allows them to question and analyze, because you know when you see the crown of thorns for the first time, it's not a crown of thorns, right? It's a leafy wreath, and some people would look at that and they look at the description of this image and it will say this is the crown of thorns in the mockery, and they'll sort of scratch their heads and go, is it though? Oh, well, the sign says it is, so it must be. But I think what I'd like this book to really encourage is for people to scratch that itch of question, right? And
right.
and analysis, right? Because sometimes you can notice things and you know you can be wrong, right? That's okay.
Mhm.
Sometimes you notice things and it allows you to discover new things. So that's what it was for me, was that moment of saying, this is new and I want to know more.
Nice. So now let's actually talk about the creation of the story, writing that first draft. So when you were plotting down and outlining how you wanted the story to go, there's a two-part question. What were the goals you had for yourself as the author, as well as any promises you're making to your future readers?
I think one of the things that it took some time to realize, because when you're writing a PhD, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of analysis. It's very
Mhm.
very technical, right? And it sort of goes on, and you need historiography and things like that. And the goal there is to really lay out all of your research, make sure you can defend everything that you've said well, and that's fine. But then when you get to writing the book, it's a very different process, because it's not just your peers that you're writing for.
Mm,
You want to appeal to a much broader audience of people who are interested but won't know, maybe even who the Otonians were, right?
right.
And why should you, right? and so when you start the book process, your audience shifts drastically from
Right.
your professors who know way more than you, right, to people who don't,
Mm,
and but who want to know. And so what I found very very helpful is when I rethought of this as a story, as a
mm,
narrative, right? This journey of the crown of thorns is a narrative, and to create that into a book, that process is so different than the PhD.
right.
And it helped me understand my audience a bit more. Everyone loves a story, right? And
Hmm.
even if you're writing a history book, you don't you don't have to say fact, 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 fact,
Right.
because all of history is just one big long story, one thing after another, as they say. And so I think it was very helpful to rethink of my audience in that way and say, what would what would I, not knowing much, knowing something, but not knowing much. Maybe I know more about Roman history than I do about early medieval history, or maybe I know about art history, but I don't know about the politics behind the art. And so
Right.
you're approaching it from lots of different angles, and seeing all of those different faces, right, so to speak, said, how can I help all of them? I know I need a story, I need a narrative, I need to bring them on a journey, rather than just give them facts.
Absolutely. And that also reminds me of another book that I actually did see. It's kind of all the same premise, and it's understanding what was it? The history behind the rising of Lazarus. What does that actually mean in history? Because for those who have read the rising of Lazarus, as we're told in the Gospels and in the Bible, Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead, and that was that was huge in the world of the Bible. But the author looks at it from not as a detective, but almost like, well, historically and culturally, what does the rising of Lazarus mean? Like, what does it have? And of course, that led to a lot of orders being founded, one of which is the Order of Lazarus, which was a very small monastic order founded by an order of knights during the era of the Crusades, and just the history on that. So it seems to me, Dr. Tibble, that your book is kind of going along that same route where it's not challenging the narrative of the Crown of Thorns, but it's rather asking questions that aren't being posed. It's looking through the narrative and saying, okay, what aren't we learning, or what aren't we asking, which I think is incredibly fascinating. And when you began drafting this first draft for this book, what was the initial reaction like from friends and family? And also, how did you go about pitching this story or curing this story to publishers?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the raising of Lazarus, because I I've always been fascinated by sort of the New Testament in history, right?
Mhm.
And sort of the historical Jesus, so to speak. And because I think when we read the Gospels, right, they actually are a pretty good story, right? If you
Yes.
just if you come to it as, no religious background or anything, and you read something like Matthew, by the end you go, oh, what? No, they didn't kill him, did they? Ah, how could they? Right? You actually get invested in these
Hmm.
characters, and so and so that's one thing. But if you actually take what's happening, as you were just saying, and bring it back into its time and place, it
Right.
just explodes your understanding. And I
Hmm.
think that the initial reaction to this can sometimes, from people who are religious, say, well, you're just nitpicking on something that means a lot to religious people. And
Right.
my reaction to that, my answer to that was, on the contrary, I think this is enhancing your understanding, right? It doesn't matter what you necessarily believe, right? But when you read something that brings you behind the words and gives you a
Right.
perspective that you hadn't seen before, I would take that more as enhancing your understanding. Um, and so that's how sometimes the initial reactions, but in an academic sense, the initial reactions were often, oh, I didn't realize we haven't talked about this, right?
Right.
Because when you think of the Crown of Thorns, in your blurb in the beginning, you think a crown made of thorns, but
Hmm.
this is a translation that's come down to us from a translation, from a translation, from a translation, right, into English.
Right.
But initially in the Greek, it's called a stephanon ex acanthon, which is a wreath made of acanthus, which is a very specific kind of plant. It's a weed.
Hmm.
It grows everywhere in the Mediterranean. If you know what a Corinthian column is, those
Hmm.
leaves coming out the top, that's acanthus, right? Um, and so I think that when I looked at this, it and pitching it to publishers, what I remembered from some of those original reactions of academics was that this is something we haven't talked about. We haven't
Right.
talked about the fact that we don't know what it looks like, We don't know what the Crown of Thorns was supposed to look like. And we don't have a study that looks only at the image of the Crown of Thorns, right? We have lots of extremely good academics on the Passion iconography, right? We've got a
Right.
lot of people writing about it, and they're fantastic. But there's not a lot that focuses just on this adornment. And so I think that when I pitched it to publishers, I said, look, I've got this idea, and I've written quite a bit of it. I'm reworking it for a broader audience, as we've already talked about. And people are really interested in the historical gospels, right? The gospels in a historical setting. And
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be a part of that trend, and a part of helping people understand the historical Jesus through art. And so I think that when that was given to publishers, and when they sent it off to academics to take a look, a lot of the when they initially came back, the reviews of the proposal, they said, yeah, no, we should have this book. We need this book. And so I think that was what the hook was for publishers, is that this hadn't quite been done yet, and that's really important to them.
Awesome. And from the initial reviews after it was published, do you feel that, your goals and your promises were validated? That yes, it is going to appease to, the academics who have studied this, but it's also going to, be engaging to those who may not be academically trained but have a passion for history, as well as those who may not be religious, but they can still understand what the story is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome. That is amazing. And that kind of leads into the next question, which is one of a few reflective questions, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on, which is, when we as authors and historians like create like our first book or first project, we imprint it with a little bit of ourselves. We call it our baby, our children, because, you know, we have put so much time and effort into this thing. And it's not an easy thing to write a book, especially writing a historical nonfiction book. That takes a lot longer than I would argue writing a fiction book, because you have to do all the research. You have to make sure, okay, what story am I exactly going to tell from my research, and so forth. And then, especially now in the digital age, I've shared this a lot with other historians and other authors on the channel, that social media is a great tool, but a damaging entity, in which case, yes, we are able to reach a wide range of people to make those connections and network, which is incredible. On the other side, we do leave ourselves open to hate speech, trolls, negativity, spam, and especially for historical authors. I remember talking with Stephen on this, is that we unfortunately get called out by those who say like, oh, you're changing like the whole, narrative that's accepted of like, this specific historical topic or this period in history. And it can be very damaging to an individual's mental health and their integrity, and whether or not they want to pursue. And imposter syndrome is always going to be in the back of every person's mind when they try to write something new. So I'm curious, for you, did you ever have those moments of imposter syndrome or heightened anxiety? And if so, or if not, what disciplined you to continue writing this incredible story, and possibly maybe expanding on it into other avenues down the road?
Yeah, imposter syndrome. Uh, that's I don't know a historian. Even the greatest historians of all time, who feel like they know everything. Everyone's felt like this before. We feel like there might be something wrong, that we missed something, that someone else will come along and say, that's not right. How dare you? You don't know what you're talking about. And it's very scary because you're right. You are putting your book out there.
Mm,
And we want people to read it. You want it to sell, and so does your publisher. So you talk about it and you put it out there. And of course you're terrified. You're waiting for that bad review. You're waiting for someone to point out all of the mistakes and all of the things that you missed. And so that probably made me hesitate for a long time to write this book, because as I said, I wrote the PhD and then I took a bit of a hiatus
mm.
because any PhD student could probably tell you they kind of get sick of it right at the end, and coming back to it is a challenge and it's a struggle. But I wanted to come back to it because you have to in some ways cling to those validations that you get, right, from people who you trust, and who trust you,
Mm,
and who have been telling you, no, this is a great idea, this is right, this is interesting, and we want to know more. And it's those sort of people that you put not on these pedestals, but that you look up to, that you
right.
respect, and they tell you, no, this is a good idea, and you really have to cling on to that and believe it yourself. It's not just allowing people to tell you whether you're right or you're good or not. Right? You have to believe it yourself. You've done the research. You're the expert on this topic, and if people think they know more, maybe they do, but
Hmm.
most of the trolls out there probably don't, right? They've
Mm.
read something on Wikipedia or they've read something on the internet and now they think they're an expert. But so you have to just keep reminding yourself and surround yourself with people who will sort of remind yourself, not the internet, right? Actual people who
Right.
keep reminding you, no, Faith, you're the expert on this. I didn't know it and now I do because you taught me. And I think that that's the challenge, is that people are going to be cruel, right? People
Hmm.
are going to be mean to you. And I have to say, and I'm sure you've spoken to plenty of women who write on this program, and they feel it a lot, right? People just seem to have license to speak to women online in a way that you're appalled by it. But I think that for all those listeners out there who are afraid to put their work out there, especially historians, just remember you've done the research. And
Hmm.
remember that other people who know more have read it and they say it's good. And that is just something that you have to cling to.
Absolutely, 100%. And this kind of leads into a very fun question, which I've been asking all of my guests, which is, well, this actually comes from a previous guest I've had on the show. Shout out to Jasmine Young for this. And she posted not too long ago that during lockdown, the quarantine, the COVID years, that it birthed sort of a golden age for independent creators, whether that's authors, historians, artists, musicians, self-employed, whatever. And I've been asking this question with all my guests to hear their thoughts on whether or not that the COVID years did birth a sort of golden age for independent creators, or rather a golden age was on the rise, but the COVID years sort of just propelled it further. So, Dr. Tibble, where do you find yourself on this discussion?
Well, I think that I I really enjoyed watching my husband, Dr. Steve Tibble. Uh, every day he would wake up and he would just do research, research, research. And he wrote about 4 books during COVID. And it was hugely inspiring to watch. I'm sure he told you on his show. But watching him write about 4 books, and at the end of the day, we would come together and he would tell me about all of these crazy discoveries about, Crusader pirates and,
Mm,
Vikings turned pious turned, pirates turned crusaders. It was just the craziest stories. And he was just loving it. And so I think if COVID, in terms of a creative blossoming, taught us anything, it's to really love it, right? Whatever you're looking at, whatever you're researching, having that time and space, and there's no other excuse, right? We're
mm,
sort of stuck in here. and learning to love it, either learning to love it again or learning to continue to love it, because I think that's what happened to a lot of people, is they remembered some of these things that they loved, and that must be a huge benefit coming out of that time.
Absolutely. And, I was definitely part of that, group of people. Like I was writing my books while I was still in graduate school, both in person and remotely. I was in Northern California for my master's in classical history. And of course, when COVID happened, I had to come straight back down to Southern California. And to avoid the monotonous, the boredom, I punched out like 4 books, 3 of which are historical fiction with a little bit of fantasy, and one that was a fantasy book. And I've learned so much, and also networking with a lot of people, fellow historians who showed me some different avenues to explore. And networking is something that we will touch on later in the interview. And now from there, we segue into my favorite portion, the business side of being an author as well as being an historian. So, Faith, so from your bio, your book is on Bloomberg for people to buy. But I am very curious, when you were curing and pitching this to publishers, did you want to go the direction of traditionally published, but to a regular one of the like big 5 in the publishing industry, Macmillan, Bloomberg, Hatchet, and those other books? Or did you want to try to publish to a academic publishing house like Princeton University or Yale or something like that?
Well, I think I just got really lucky. I mean, you mentioned networking, but it was really just about asking people, who had published books,
Mm-hmm.
who or were in the process of getting a book published, and just being honest and saying, do you mind pitching this to your editor? Or do you mind asking if I can pitch this to your editor? Here is my, 4-sentence blurb on what it's about. And so I would ask a couple of my colleagues and my, fellow historians, and one of them said, yeah, of course, yeah, no, I'll pass it on. And he said, and his editor said, well, this isn't really for me, but I have a contact at a different publication who might be interested. And that publication was T&T Clark Bloomsbury.
Ah,
And yeah, so it's sort of, you're making these connections, and you just can't be afraid to ask, right? And so I think I lucked out that I asked the right people, and they were kind enough to be able to pass it on, and then their editors were kind enough to pass it on, because it is a network where
mm-hmm.
a lot of people know each other, right? And they want to help their colleagues succeed. So if there's something that's not right for them, they might have someone who they know it's right for. And it was such a good match. So I think that's basically how it managed for me. But the lesson from that is, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and ask someone for help.
Definitely 100%. And it also can be very intimidating when you are, curing and pitching your book to, editors and publishers, because you don't know how they're going to react. You don't know if it's going to be well received. And I talked with a lot of authors on this discussion where you do have the sense of, gatekeeping mentality, which is both a benefit, but maybe a hindrance. And for those who don't know what that is, I'll just go over very briefly. The term gatekeeping in the publishing industry, how I've interpreted it, is only allowing certain voices and certain authors into these publishing houses, but not taking into account like these newcomers who are on the rise, who do have a following. And I've had a lot of authors who have been both sides of the argument, in which they both give valid points. But for you, Faith, I'd like to hear your thoughts on, this discussion of gatekeeping, specifically gatekeeping for historical authors who are writing about historical topics for publishers who have a vast audience in that particular field of history.
Well, it's not something that I've experienced. I think
Mm,
when people are looking at their proposals, right? This
mm,
is This is really the most important thing. And it's getting that proposal right. I
Mm,
think that you have to do a lot of research about the publisher that you're pitching to, about the editor that you're pitching to, because you want to make sure it's a right fit for them, right? You're thinking beyond just the publication, beyond even the editor. You're thinking about their audience. Who are they pitching to? And that's where the proposal really needs to be catered to who you're talking to and who they're talking to. So I think when it comes to that proposal, it's really important to put a lot of thought into how you're pitching your voice and how it matches the voice of the editor and publisher and audience that you're pitching it to. Um, that's what I would say in
mm.
terms of when you're pitching.
Nice. That is very well said, Faith. Absolutely well said. And I think we also mentioned this before, or you've probably mentioned this earlier in the interview. But when it comes to, understanding one's audience and who we write for, it's very, very, I won't say challenging, but it's definitely in that marketing aspect that you really have to consider, okay, I've written the book. Who exactly am I writing this for? Or who am I marketing this for? Because when we write the books, we are the target audience first and foremost because we know the source material better than anyone else. But with that said, when we make the decision to publish a book, we do have to consider, okay, who exactly is this going to be for? Who are going to read it? Who's going to pick it up, etc. So for you, Faith, did you have a good idea of who your audience was in the beginning? And in your opinion, when should an author take into account their audience? During the initial drafting phase when they're just writing the book, or during the marketing phase when the book is on the verge of being published?
I would say right away. You need to think about who you want to read this, right? Because if it's just you, then there's no point in publishing it. You want
Mm-hmm.
to think about who it is that you want to read this book, because historians, academics, they could pitch things at a lot of different levels. Because you think a lot of academics teach, right? They teach, they teach their seniors, they teach their freshmen, they'd have classes of 100 people that they have to bring things to 1,000 different levels. And so you think about how our professors and instructors are trying to pitch to many different audiences at many different levels, and they don't go into class thinking, I wonder what this class will be like. They have an
Right.
idea, right? They have an
Mm.
when they're preparing their lessons, they know approximately the class that they're teaching, right? And of course you adjust and you learn along the way, and that's when it comes to the editing phase. But you go into it with an idea of who you want to read, right? And when
Right.
you do that, that makes your proposal all the easier. So if you want to reach a very academic audience, write a very academic book. But if you want to reach an audience that might be interested in this topic, has had done some research, but may not know everything, but wants to know more, then you pitch it to them. Or if you want to pitch to an audience that knows they know they really like the Romans, but they don't know anything about it, and they don't want to pick up a book that confuses them and uses all of these terms that they're not going to understand, so they're not even going to bother to pick it up, then you need to think about them, right? So that, I guess, yeah, for me, I would say always be thinking of your audience, because it just makes the book easier to write in a funny sort of way. And I think that when it comes to writing, I have found that it's important to just not care what's coming out of your pen or your keyboard. No matter
Okay.
where you are, no matter what you're doing, you say, okay, I've got an hour on the train to get out these thoughts of something that I just read. Just write it. Just write it. You don't need, try not to have, you need your special light or your special cup of tea or anything. No. Just write it. No matter where you are, you've got a pad of paper, you've got a pen, just write it out. Because half the time it's going to be rubbish, but half the time it's going to be good. You'll take some, you'll lose some, but all I would advise is just write, because that's the joy, right? You love the research, you love the topic, So get it out and let that come out through your writing. That's what I would always advise about the writing process.
Awesome. And now talking about the readership, which in my opinion is a little bit more not difficult, but also probably the most challenging when marketing to, because you can market to a broad audience, because that is always what we are taught in the publishing industry: market to your audience, find out who your audience is. But the readership kind of gets overlooked in the sense of, well, who are the individual people who are going to pick this up? Now, in the fiction world, and also as nonfiction, you have middle grade, YA, NA, which is new adult, and adult fiction, which have their own sets of rules that all authors have to follow. And I was talking to, again, many other authors on the show, and they have argued that depending on where your book is, like that readership, it is a little bit of a challenge. And also for historical authors, too, whether they want to write for a more academic readership or a general historical readership where they have the understanding, they know of it, but they're not going to get bogged down by the academic jargon and get confused. So for you, Dr. Tibble, where would you say that your book falls under, and what has been the challenges of writing to that particular readership?
I would probably put my readership in the category of people who are interested in a topic, who have some background in knowledge of the topic, but want to know more. So my book and my writing is pitched to people who probably know a certain facet, probably fairly deeply, of the topic. So either they're art historians, but might not know a lot about politics of the time, or they're Roman historians that might not know about first century Judea, or might not know about the art of the early Christians, or they're medieval historians or art historians who don't know where these things came from, so they might not be familiar with the precedent. Or you have modern art enthusiasts who would like to know more about the background. So I would say my readership is interested and knows a lot about one facet of what we're writing about, or a couple facets of what I'm writing about, and is curious to look beyond that one thing. And I think that they're a fascinating group of people, because, again, as I mentioned earlier, the readers, a lot of people that you'll encounter, they do like discovering. They do like learning new things. And so I've always really appreciated that reader who wants to take the plunge in something that they are familiar with, but want to be more deeply familiar with it.
Absolutely. And this kind of talks into, well, not talks, but leads into another question, which I'm always eager to hear guest thoughts on, which is this balance of, individuality in our writing, because as authors, we want to showcase our individuality because we don't want to be like anybody else. We're not trying to write like anybody else. However, with that in mind, we also have to be respectful of the materials that have come before, especially as historical authors, because yes, you do want to showcase your research, your writings, something that you're passionate about, but you also want to make callbacks to previous authors who have written about this before, or maybe one aspect that you covered in your own writings. So for you, Faith, how has been this balance, this scale for you, and how challenging was it to, balance your individuality as an author and historian, but also showing respect to the scholars of the past?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with that word respect. We have to respect the scholars who came before us, because without them, we wouldn't be curious about what we're talking about. Without them, we wouldn't know where to start. They teach us how to learn about these things. They teach us what they know. They took the time to put these things together. And oftentimes, a lot of the historians that at least that I was looking at, they're at a time where they actually had to go to all of these places to see
Yeah.
all of this art. Whereas we're so lucky that we have all of these databases that I can zoom in on sort of the, the smudge that someone left behind on a manuscript. And so you have to just absolutely respect what they've done. There's no criticism that they missed something, because they didn't miss it. That's not what they
Right.
were writing about, right? And I think that that's one thing you learn pretty early on when you're doing research, especially PhD students, that you just have to have a huge amount of respect for what other scholars have done previous and in tandem with you, right? So you're going to have scholars who are writing about these things while you are too. And you just have to really appreciate and respect what it is that they are learning and discovering, and take it on board. That's the thing. Sometimes people, they'll see a new publication come out, and the heart will stop because it looks almost like what they're writing, right? Oh
Oh,
no,
yes.
oh no, that's the same topic. Someone's already published it. Wait, I need to publish it too. And I think you can have that heart stopping moment. That's fine, but then go ahead and read that with an open mind to how it can help you, because that's all we want, right? We're just trying to help each other learn and discover and dig deeper. And so I would say that, definitely give that citation, give those kudos to the historians that have come before and that are learning alongside you.
Absolutely. And I kind of had, as a little tangent, had that heart stopping moment, not as a historical author, but as a fantasy author. I had two guests on the show previously uh, who wrote kind of the same story that I wrote, which is a fantasy, not a fantasy version, but it's a fantasy novel that deals with a lot of Catholic and Christian teachings and themes involving a lot of angels, demons. And it was a really it was kind of so bizarre that three random authors had the same idea to write a similar story involving an angel fighting demons. And it's just, oh my gosh, is this genetic? Is this what we write about? It was so funny. But you're absolutely right that, we will have those heart stopping moments when we do see a book that is eerily similar to what we are writing, but also to what you said, we can learn from it, see what they have touched on and what we can use, maybe not replicate, but definitely see how they approach this topic and this subject, which is, in the publishing industry, just like history, a grind. We're always going to be learning. We're always going to be improving our craft, which leads to a very, very powerful reflective question. So brace yourself. This is a very loaded one and has a lot of context to it. So um, I've been doing this show now for about 6, 7 years, and throughout that time, I've had the opportunity to interview a wide range of authors and historians, from professors, reenactors, students, history buffs, content creators, as well as authors, traditionally, indie, hybrid, the works. I've learned so much from them. And from my interactions with all of these amazing people in their fields, I've learned that there are two paths for both: to be something and to be known as something. And for historical authors, it is very interesting because, you know, as historical authors, for one path, you're dedicated to storytelling, you're dedicated to the craft, you're not motivated by capital. To be known as an historical author or to be known as an historian, that is someone who is dedicated to marketing, building their brand, building their awareness, going on shows like these to showcase their work. And both have their own objectives, their own hurdles that lead to the end goal, which is world renown acclaim, literacy acclaim, etc. But I definitely feel, especially for first time people, let's say students, getting out of university with a thesis that they've worked on and they want to transform it into, let's say, a journal or an article or maybe a book, the second path is the most enticing. And unfortunately, in this industry, there is no guarantee that it's going to be the start of your legacy. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it is true. This is not a, get rich quick money scheme for, authors and even for historians. If you don't go the academic side or you don't go the federal side and you want to build your own path as a historian, it is not easy. There's going to be a lot of bumps and hiccups along the road. With that being said, there are exceptions to the rule. There are many incredible historians whose first works launched them to award-winning status. That's not an easy thing to do, but that is a very rare thing. And generally speaking, we are going to have highs and lows. And for people who want to make this their sole source of income, sorry to say that's not going to be the case. Will we all like it to be? Absolutely. We would probably quit our jobs and just write for the fun of it and hone our craft and write whatever we want. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So I turn this over to you with this discussion of whether or not yes, there is no guarantee that in this industry, your book, your thesis, your project, your presentation, whatever, is going to be the start of your legacy. But whether you go the route of an author or whether you go the route of an historian, that shouldn't stop you from honing your craft to be the best version of yourself you can be. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you have to go into this with your eyes wide open and
Mm,
pretty much assume that this is not going to be what makes you money, right? This isn't what
mm-mm.
you do. This isn't your day job, right? This is fun, right? This is what we love. This is our, for lack of a better term, our passion, right?
Right.
And you go into it because you enjoy it, not because you feel you have to, not because you feel it's going to necessarily go wide and far and everyone's going to read it and you're going to become super famous. No, no, no. You do it because you found something extraordinary and you keep finding all these extraordinary things and at some point you've just got to write it down. And then because you've gone through all of this effort to write it down, think, you know what? Maybe other people want to know about this. Maybe other people are curious about this topic. Maybe they want to be able to read about it too. And then that's when you move towards publishing. But I think first and foremost, it's just got to be something, and I've mentioned this earlier, that you just absolutely love because you do it. It's a labor of love rather than
Mm,
something you feel like you have to do, or that this is going to be your big break, right? And if you go
right.
into that assuming that it's going to be, or even hoping that it's going to be, it just puts so much pressure on it. So I say take the pressure off, enjoy what you're doing, look forward to those conversations like this, where people say, this is interesting, I want to read about this, tell me about your process, because it's fun. It's fun to talk about. So take the pressure off and enjoy the process.
Absolutely. And during that whole process, as we touched on a little bit, networking is very, very huge, not just in the publishing industry, but also as historians to meet new people who have other connections to build upon. And honestly, that's what people think about history and the publishing industry. Most people tend to believe that, both those fields are very cutthroat, trying to sabotage, but we're not. We're all in the same boat together. We're all trying to get, the same thing at the very end. So, Faith, I would like to give you this opportunity to name drop or give shout outs to anyone who have helped you along the way, whether in your academic career, starting off during your PhD, or even now with the book and just everything now.
Yeah, I mean, a couple shout outs to people who helped me early on. My professor in Roman history and Latin, Dr. Eric Kondratiev, he was hugely influential and really believed in what I was writing and thought it was incredibly interesting. And I've had a lot of people support me along the way. my own advisor, Naturikover, at the University of Haifa. She was just incredibly passionate about learning and discovery, and what I was discovering, and Gil Fischhoff as well, who taught me at the University of Haifa. He looks a lot at Crusader art, and he was also always just so encouraging. These are the kind of people that you want to make sure that you're always talking to. And even Steve Tibble, my husband, he was just couldn't wait to hear what I had found, and vice versa. And so that kind of community of scholarship is what keeps us going. And you find that by going to conferences, going to seminars, picking up the phone, just generally networking, and there's been a lot of people that Steve and I have met along the way that have just been hugely influential and hugely supportive, and I think just make this journey bearable. And they make this journey even more fun, because there are times where it's really hard, right? It's really hard to feel like you need to keep going. And how do you, especially when you're getting a PhD, it can be very lonely and very hard. And so you just need to keep talking to these people who really just unquestionably believe in you. And that's what keeps you going. And again, it's the community. I think people, as you say, it's actually it's not as mean and cutthroat as people think. It is a community of people who are, I'm always surprised sometimes how people will just jump to help you, right? And in yourself too, right? If someone approaches you and says, "Gosh, Faith, I really need help with it," absolutely no problem. Let me help you. Right. And I think that those are the kind of things that we need to remember about one another and about our academic author historian communities, is that ultimately we just want to see each other succeed. I had a friend of mine who sent me a message and said, I'm always thrilled when I know someone who's written a book that I get to hold. Right. And it's so heartwarming that your friends, even they're struggling through their PhDs, or they're trying to write their first books, that they just get so thrilled to see the people around them in their communities write books that they get to hold. And it's really heartening. And I think it's important to cling to that, and to make sure you continue to surround yourself with people who are encouraging, and who you encourage, who you want to encourage, because it makes it so much easier when someone encourages you, but then you want to go full in and help them and support them as well. It just makes that community so much better.
Absolutely. And with that all said, we now arrive at the final question of this amazing interview on the show. So, Dr. Faith Tibble, here is the final question. Everything you've learned thus far in your academic journey to now as a published author, what is your word of wisdom to fellow historians and fellow writers watching and or listening to this interview right now?
Wow. I would say just write. Just write and have fun with it. Just write, have fun with it, and don't worry so much. Those would be my words of wisdom, because worry and not having fun and hesitating to write, these are all the things that get in the way of us as writers. So my words of wisdom: just write, have fun, don't worry so much.
Awesome. And with that all said, viewers and listeners, this concludes the final interview here on the channel for the month of March. I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Faith Tibble for making her official debut here on the channel. We wish her the very best. And where can people find you on social media? They want to engage and talk more about the book. And speaking of the book, where can people go and purchase a copy?
Absolutely. If you'd like to purchase a copy, please head over to bloomsbury.com and just search Tibble. I will pop up and you'll see my book with the big golden crown of thorns on it. You can also go to Amazon and search Faith Tibble. As we've mentioned, there are at least two of us. So search Faith Tibble and you'll find my book there. On social media, you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Faith Tibble. I'm also on X as Faith Tibble. I am on LinkedIn as Faith Tibble, PhD. So you can find me in all of these places.
Awesome. I'll provide all those links down below in the description of this video. And if you want to see her husband's interview, I will also tag it right here as well.
Fantastic.
You're welcome, Faith. You're welcome. And again, viewers and listeners, thank you so much for joining me for the month of March. It has meant a lot, and I already have April lined up. I cannot wait to share with you all the amazing guests. And as a final note, I did want to say, if you follow me on social media, make sure to look out for next Monday, as I will be dropping the official cover of my 4th book, which will be a continuation in the Gathering universe and will be a direct sequel to Amanus, Son of Persia. Don't want to give too much spoilers away, so be on the lookout from that post from me dropping next Monday. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and I will see you all next month.